The content of this video, as well as the thoughts, views, and opinions expressed herein, belong to the presenter and do not necessarily reflect the views of Brigham Young University or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Hello, welcome back to another installment of the second half of the Book of Mormon. My name is Dr. Jan Martin, and I'm here to help you go through some chapters of Ether today. I'm happy to be here, and the Book of Ether is quite interesting. And so we're just going to have a little fun looking at the beginning chapters of it, and I'm going to focus on leadership. We see a lot of leadership through the early part of the Book of Ether. So let's jump in and just kind of catch us up on what we're doing here. Now, last time we ended with the destruction of the Nephite nation and Mormon lamenting that. And so in between Mormon 6 and Ether 1, we have some background here that we need to remind us about. So Mormon is killed, and Moroni has been given the Book of Mormon, and he's been asked to write a few things in there, and been given an assignment by his father to translate the Book of Ether. So when we hit Ether chapter 1, that's what Moroni is doing. He is taking these 24 plates that were found by the people of Limhi back in the days of Mosiah. So that's Mosiah chapter 8 if you're interested in going back and looking. They found these plates up in the Jaredite lands and brought them back to the Nephites, and the Nephites have had them. And Moroni's been asked to put a translation of them into Mormon's record. And so if you come in Ether chapter 1 to verse 3, you see Moroni starting to do that. Okay, he's going to begin this record, and he mentions that it starts at the creation of Adam and Eve and things, but he's not going to give us a whole lot of detail there. And so he starts the abridgment of the Tower of Babel and gives us all the detail from the Tower of Babel on, because that explains the people of Jared. So chapters 1 and 2 we'll have a look at in a minute, how their families are protected by the judgments of the Lord in confounding all the languages, and then they're led away from there, and they get in these barges, and they travel, and they come over to the Americas. And then we hit chapter 3, and the brother of Jared sees the premortal Savior there. So I like to use a map here just to help you understand where the Jaredites were living in relation to the Nephites. The Jaredites were on the American continent long before the Nephites came, but they were destroyed just shortly before the Nephites arrive in 600 BC. So Lehi is coming onto the Americas, and then you kind of have up north just the winding down of the Jaredite destruction. So that's the land of desolation. It's up there circled on the map, and you can see it just being north of Nephite lands. And so as we jump into this, I would just like to deal with a common question I get with this record is, how come Moroni never tells us the name of the brother of Jared? And so let's start with the name of the brother of Jared first, and then I'll explain to you maybe why it was difficult for him to write it on the record. And so we have a fun little story from church history about the name of the brother of Jared. So here it is. It says, while residing in Kirtland, Elder Reynolds Cahoon had a son born to him. One day when President Joseph Smith was passing by his door, he called the prophet in and asked him to bless and name the baby. Joseph did so and gave the boy the name Mahonri Moriancumer. When he had finished the blessing, he laid the child on the bed, and turning to Elder Cahoon, he said, the name I have given your son is the name of the brother of Jared. The Lord has just shown or revealed it to me. So we have this story, and maybe the name of the brother of Jared was Mahonri Moriancumer. But let me just show you a couple of textual clues that help us see that Joseph might be right on here, but also that we kind of need to consider the name Mahonri as well. And so if you just want to come back with me to Alma chapter 8, I just want to show you a cultural thing that the Nephites do. Now, we don't know for sure if the Jaredites are also doing this, but it's likely because ancient cultures have this kind of thing in common of the way they name their cities. So if you come back to Alma chapter 8, verse 7, we learn that it was the custom of the people of Nephi to call their lands and their cities and their villages, yea, even all their small villages, after the name of him who first possessed them. And thus it was with the land of Ammonihah. So Ammonihah apparently was settled by someone by the name of Ammonihah. Well, if you then jump back over to Ether chapter 2, verse 13, we can kind of see this idea that the Jaredites might have the same kind of cultural tradition in the way they name their places. And so in verse 13 it says, "And now I proceed with my record. For behold, it came to pass that the Lord did bring Jared and his brethren forth, even to that great sea which divided the lands. And that as they came to the sea, they pitched their tents, and they called the name of the place Moriancumer. And they dwelt in tents upon the seashore for the space of 4 years." So that's the same name that Joseph Smith is giving to Reynold Cahoon's son there. And so whether the brother Jared's name was Mahonri Moriancumer or just Moriancumer is the question. Mahonri was a quite popular name in the 1800s in that part of the world when Joseph was there, so maybe Mahonri is not referring to the brother of Jared, and just Moriancumer is. But we don't know. But I do want to give you this textual connection that Moriancumer seems legitimate, and it may be that this first settlement that the Jaredites make here on this seashore is named after the brother of Jared. So why would Moroni have trouble writing Moriancumer there? Well, Moroni is writing in hieroglyphs, not in an alphabetical language. Reformed Egyptian seems to use pictures like the Egyptian language does, and Egyptian hieroglyphs, there's only so many of them, and you can only say so many things with them. And sometimes it's hard to say in hieroglyphs what you could say in Hebrew. And so it might be that the word Moriancumer is very difficult for Moroni to engrave on the plates, and he might just say, "I'm not doing that. I'm going to use brother of Jared because that's easier. I can maybe have an easier hieroglyph for brother of Jared than I could for Moriancumer." So just be thinking about the difficulties that Moroni is having with writing on the plates, and the hieroglyphs might make that hard for him. So what I want to do is have you jump back to Ether chapter 1, and let's just quickly have a look at leadership. We have some interesting things going on with this family. We have Jared, we have the brother of Jared, and we have the Lord. And they're all involved in this interesting discussion about what's going to happen to Jared, his brother, their families, and their friends when the language is confounded. And so rather than have me read all of 34 through 43 for you, which would be quite tedious, I'm going to ask you to just pause the video for a minute so you can read 34 through 43. And with this question I'm giving you, what can I learn about leadership? So what I want you to focus on is who's in charge? Like, just look at the interactions between the brother of Jared, and the Lord, and see if you can finish reading all the way through 43 and then just come up with kind of a leadership model of what you think is going on there for that. And so go ahead and pause, and then when you come back, we'll just have a little discussion about it. Okay, so hopefully you had some fun looking at this interaction between these three people. And so I don't know what leadership model you came up with, but it does seem to me that we have some different delegations going on, that the Lord obviously is ultimately in charge, but you have an interesting leadership relationship between Jared and the brother of Jared. And it seems that Jared is kind of ordering the brother of Jared around sometimes, and maybe Jared can't get his own revelation, and you're just kind of wondering what's going on here. And so I've just come up with a plausible way to explain this relationship that might be useful for you. And so it might be that the brother of Jared is the spiritual leader of the group, that he's the prophet, and that he holds the priesthood keys of governing the spiritual side of things. It might be that Jared is either the civic leader, or he just holds some kind of a calling as a counselor or something similar, and that his responsibility is to solve the problem with the languages. And so the brother of Jared may have delegated this to Jared. Jared's trying to figure out how to solve the problems that will come when the languages are confounded. And so he keeps going back and counseling with his priesthood leader and asking for help and talking to the Lord. And that they're counseling this all through from a position of callings. And so brother of Jared may exercise his priesthood keys, getting the final confirmations that Jared's solutions are in line with God's will, but Jared's been coming up with the ideas. And so I think this is a great place to see the power of counseling together with the Lord's help on making important decisions. This is a big deal, to have your languages confounded and not being able to communicate with anyone. And so it really matters to come up with some kind of solution there. So this is a possibility. There may be other ways that you want to read what's going on here, but this certainly brings up the topic of leadership. How do we make decisions? How do we lead families and friends and things when we need to make these decisions? But the thing you want to notice is once all the counseling has been decided and all the praying has gone through, they make a decision and everyone moves ahead in unity. And that unity is really important when we're leading. And so I want to just stop for just a minute. This is really important in the church today, and I just want to use this opportunity as you're seeing the brother of Jared talking to God and getting revelation direction, and he seems to be functioning as a priesthood holder and somebody who has the stewardship over the group spiritually, to talk about priesthood. We have a lot of confusion in our church about priesthood authority, priesthood power, and priesthood keys, and it means a lot to me to make sure that we teach this clearly to both men and women so we can function with a little more knowledge. So if I were to ask a classroom about this, I would ask them to give me a definition of priesthood authority. That's the one we'll start with. And I would ask them, well, how do you define priesthood authority? What is that? And very often I'll get, kind of some muddled answers and some things. But sometimes students can very clearly say something like this. Priesthood authority is the authorization to represent God and act in His name. It means I can go out and do something for Him that He will honor and acknowledge. So it's permission, it's the authorization to act for God. And so hopefully you can understand priesthood authority is not the same thing as priesthood power or priesthood keys, and we need to learn to be able to differentiate these three things. But authority is the permission or authorization to act for God. So then when I ask my students to define priesthood power, they often really struggle with this. They don't have a good way of expressing what priesthood power is. And so I try and kind of lead and help them out with this. But David A. Bednar gave one of the very best definitions of priesthood power I've ever seen. And he said priesthood power is the spiritual capacity to represent God in the work of salvation. He clarifies that ordination to priesthood office, for example, confers authority, but righteousness is required to act with power. So I love his concept of spiritual capacity. So when you put these two things together, God gives me permission or authority to act for Him, but then I need help to act the way He would act in any given situation. And so that's the spiritual capacity He then endows me with so I can act like Him as I'm going about my duties. The interesting thing about priesthood capacity, though, or spirit capacity, is that it is governed by my righteousness. So the more righteous I am, the more spiritual capacity in the priesthood I will have. And if I'm not living very righteously, then my capacity to act with power will be diminished. And sometimes, if I'm really unrighteous, I won't have any power at all. And so we need to keep these two things separate. We have permission and we have capacity. And we can sometimes have permission, but have no capacity in the power of the priesthood at all because of the way we're living our lives. And so I then move on to priesthood keys. And some of my students can kind of get somewhere with priesthood keys. They seem to understand that they have to do with governing, but they're not very good at being able to define it. So I'm just going to use the one from the handbook. The current handbook is really good with priesthood. And it says priesthood keys are the authority to direct the use of the priesthood on behalf of God's children. The use of all priesthood authority in the church is directed by those who hold priesthood keys. So our authorization or permission to act for God is important, but we don't just get to go out and do whatever we want with priesthood authority. You can imagine the mess that would cause without someone overseeing what people who have priesthood authority are doing with it. We need to make sure that it's being used properly and that it's governed and not just a free-for-all for people. So we need all of these things. We need permission to act for God. We need capacity to act like He would act. And then we need somebody who's overseeing all of this to make sure that people aren't abusing their authority and that they understand that righteousness is needed to act with power. And those are our priesthood keys. So these are 3 simple, short little ways you can remember these. Priesthood authority is permission to act. Priesthood power is capacity to act. And priesthood keys are permission to direct what other people do with priesthood authority. So this really is important and to get conversant and really good at understanding this. Now, the next thing I like to do is just point out that God's house is a house of order, and this is why it works like this. We don't want priesthood authority just given to anyone and everyone. We don't want them going out doing whatever they want. We need to have some governance of this incredible power and permission to act for God. And so we have our priesthood key holders watching out for that. Now, what I then like to do is ask my students, okay, now that you know what priesthood authority is, the permission to act for God, who gets to have priesthood authority? And then I let my students just start telling me. And so you can think about what you would answer to that. Who holds and has priesthood authority? Well, the obvious one is the one that most of the time we see at church, is that men are ordained to offices in the priesthood, and we see those offices functioning when we go to church. So let me just remind you, Aaronic priesthood offices are deacon, teacher, priest, and bishop. Again, those are our most comfortable ones because we see them at church the most often, being people doing them and fulfilling these offices there. And you obviously see the bishop in your ward up on the stand. Just remember, he's the president of the Aaronic priesthood, and there they sit, our Aaronic priesthood offices. We also have Melchizedek priesthood offices. We're always familiar with elder and probably high priest, but we have trouble with the other 3. We don't always remember patriarch, 70, and apostle. Those are all priesthood offices in the Melchizedek priesthood that people can be ordained to. And so just remember that we have those, and of course anyone ordained to these offices is given permission by God to fulfill the duties of that office. Now, those are not the only people in the ward who hold and have priesthood authority. So let's remind you that there are other callings in the ward that are not related to priesthood offices. There are plenty of callings to be had that need to be done. And so any man or woman who's set apart to serve in any kind of a calling also has priesthood authority to do that calling. That's what the setting apart is for, is to give you the permission and the blessings associated with the fulfillment of that calling. And then we just need to remind you that there are assignments in the church as well that don't involve a setting apart. So an example of these are your ministering assignments. Men and women and youth can all be given ministering assignments. You don't get set apart to these assignments, but you're getting permission to do them by the priesthood key holder in your ward. That would be your bishop. And so you're being delegated authority by him to fulfill these responsibilities. And so you do those through the power, through the authority of the priesthood. Okay, so one of the things we just want to make sure members of the church understand is priesthood authority is exercised by men and women alike in our wards, even though they may do different jobs with those things. So Dallin H. Oaks taught very critically in April 2014 General Conference. We are not accustomed to speaking of women having the authority of the priesthood in their church callings, but what other authority can it be? Whoever functions in an office or calling received from one who holds priesthood keys exercises priesthood authority in performing his or her assigned duties. So this is important for all of us to understand. So at church, we can function and knowledgeably that anyone with callings, assignments, or offices is exercising priesthood authority. And we need to learn to be respectful of each other's authority and callings and where we're able to exercise that, and not just assume that it's only men and that it's only about priesthood offices, because it's not. Now, once you're given some priesthood authority, you're now able to access priesthood power for your assignments. So when I ask my students who has priesthood power, I'm hoping they're all going to say, everyone. We all have access to this. So let's just review. Any men who are serving in their priesthood offices have access to priesthood power to fulfill their duties. Any man or woman who has a calling has access to priesthood power to fulfill the calling, and any man or woman who has an assignment can access priesthood power for that assignment. Okay, and we just need to remember that there's one other way we get access to priesthood power, and that's through ordinances. So any man or woman who's participating in any ordinance, from baptism through the temple, has access to priesthood power through their keeping of those ordinances. And so there's plenty of priesthood power to go around. One time, Elder Ballard said that God is very generous with his priesthood power, and hopefully you can see that. People from age 8 and up all have access to priesthood power, men and women alike. But just remember that power is based on our righteousness. And if we're not keeping our covenants and we're not living up to the commandments and not doing the things the Lord's asked us to do, then our capacity to act with priesthood power will be diminished and may even be eliminated if we're acting in a way that's really unrighteous. And so just remember that we control the amount of power we have by the way we live our lives and how we keep our covenants. And so it's really nice. Sister Linda K. Burton just reminded us all priesthood power is available to all of us, and even 8-year-olds and up can have access to that, and that's really, really important. Now, when I move to priesthood keys and start asking about priesthood keys, this confuses a lot of people. And so I get some answers and I get other ones that aren't right. And so I'm just going to show you on the list who in church callings holds priesthood keys. We'll start with the prophet. He has all priesthood keys that have been revealed on the earth at the moment. Just remember there are probably some keys that he doesn't have because they haven't been given to us, like the keys of resurrection, for example, or the keys over creation. So President Kimball reminds us that we don't have all keys, but we have all the ones that we need. And the prophet holds all of those that have been revealed on earth today. The apostles, his 14 colleagues, also hold all of the priesthood keys, but they don't use them all. They only use the ones they're delegated to use by their particular assignments. And the prophet's the one who oversees those assignments. And so just remember that they have them all, but they're under the direction of the prophet in what they use. Then we move to the more local levels. We have stake presidents and district presidents. We have temple presidents, mission presidents, bishops and branch presidents, church historic site presidents. And then on our ward level, we have our elders quorum president, our teachers quorum president, and our deacons quorum president. So hopefully the word president is starting to ring a bell, that many presidents in our church hold priesthood keys. But don't just make that a blanket thing. Not all presidents hold keys, but these ones do. And the way you're going to be able to tell if a president should have keys or not is if they're overseeing other people with priesthood authority. And so every one of the people on this list is overseeing someone who has authority, what they're doing with it, the delegation of authority, and so that will help you understand that even a little 12-year-old who's our deacons quorum president is overseeing other priesthood holders who are doing priesthood offices, and they need to just make sure it's regulated and that everybody's doing the right thing. And so what is the purpose of these keys? And so we have Joseph Fielding Smith saying, "These keys are the right of presidency. They are the power and authority to govern and direct all of the Lord's affairs on earth. Those who hold them have the power to govern and control the manner in which all others may serve in the priesthood. all of us may hold the priesthood, and he's talking to priesthood holders at the time, but we can only use it as authorized and directed by those who hold the keys. And so it's really important that we just understand all of this as we're talking about leadership. Now, one clarification I want to add is about other presidents of other organizations. For example, the Young Women's president or the Relief Society president or the primary president. They're not on this list of keys, and there's a reason for that. And so let's see what the handbook has to say. It says priesthood keys are not given to others, including counselors to local priesthood leaders or presidents of church organizations like Young Women's and Primary. Rather, these leaders are given delegated authority when they are set apart and when they receive assignments under the direction of those who hold priesthood keys. Presidents of the church organizations preside under the direction of those who hold priesthood keys. So our Relief Society president, our primary president, our Young Women's president, our Sunday school president, they don't hold any keys because they are delegated to function under the direction of the bishop's keys. And so just keep that in mind. It's important. And Relief Society, primary, Sunday school, we're not really overseeing anyone else who's exercising priesthood authority in that sense, and so we don't need priesthood keys. So hopefully that's helpful, and that we can just remember that all of us are joining in here with priesthood authority and power, and that people aren't being left out of this. Now, let's move on as we're looking back to the book of Ether at how decisions should be made. We're actually watching Jared, the brother of Jared and the Lord, make some decisions. Now, I had you read these verses already and looking at how this went down, but now I'd just like you to remember how it went. We have Jared, the brother of Jared, and the Lord. And how many people were involved in this decision about what do we do about the confounding of the languages? Lots of people are involved. There's a counseling proceeding going on. And so I just want to utilize some information from the handbook to help us appreciate how to make decisions, whether at church or in our families. This is the Heavenly Father's system. He says Heavenly Father has established councils as an important part of receiving inspiration, making decisions, and accomplishing His work. Councils existed before the world was created. Each of us participated in these councils before coming to earth. Following this pattern, the Church of Jesus Christ is governed by councils at every level. The Lord has instructed the leaders of His church to counsel together in doing His work. So as we proceed in families or as we proceed at church assignments, we need to really consider utilizing the counseling and not just have one person making all the decisions. Brother Jared, and the Lord, we're all involved here in deciding what to do with these people. Now, the General Handbook also goes on to say how a council meeting should be run. And I don't know about you, but I've sat in many councils. Some have been better than others. And it's good to know how to do this. So it says during a council meeting, the leader or someone the leader assigns explains the matter being considered. The leader then encourages discussion among all council members, asking questions and seeking ideas. The leader encourages members to speak openly and honestly. The diverse backgrounds, ages, experiences, and viewpoints of council members enrich the council. Members share suggestions and listen to each other respectfully as they seek to know the Lord's will. A spirit of inspiration and unity can prevail. And so, again, I just encourage all of you out there, when you get invited to sit on a council or you're a part of a presidency and there's a presidency meeting and you're counseling together, speak up and add your opinions and your viewpoints and your experiences. It enriches the council, it helps the council function, and better decisions are made when everybody's willing to say and share and not just put all the pressure on the president of whatever council you've got there. We need to learn to do this better. And the Lord can then be part of the counseling process and help us make a better decision. Now, let's specifically talk to women out there. I have found in the church that women tend to hold back in councils. Often they feel intimidated or feel like their ideas won't be taken seriously. And so we want to address that and just invite all women in the church to speak up. So the handbook says, in a council that includes women and men, the leader seeks insights and ideas from both. Women and men have different perspectives that provide needed balance. Men and women reach better decisions and have greater success in the Lord's service as they value each other's contributions and work together. A leader guides the council's discussions. However, he or she should listen more than talk. When a council leader shares his or her perspectives too early, it can inhibit the contributions of others. And when necessary, the council leader gently redirects or refocuses the discussion. So it's important to realize that whoever the president of the organization is, whether it's the bishop or the Relief Society president, we need to be careful in not dominating and taking over the discussions and already have made decisions. After the discussion, the leader may either decide on a course of action or postpone a decision while seeking additional information and guidance. The decision should be informed by the discussion and confirmed by the Spirit. The council process helps bring about inspired decisions that go beyond the leader's own best judgment. So, sisters, this is why we need you to come to councils willing and excited to participate and to contribute and not sit back and expect the men or the president of the organization to make all the decisions. Those tend to not be the greatest decisions when one person is making them. Now, Elder Ballard gave some great training to bishops, and he said, you bishops energize your ward leaders by giving them a chance to offer suggestions and to be heard. You prepare future leaders by allowing them to participate and learn. You can lift much of the load from your own shoulders through this kind of involvement. People who feel ownership of a problem are more willing to help find a solution, greatly improving the possibility of success. So when I get to this point with my students, I just like to stop and ask them, when have you had a leader who did this well, who let you actually function in your calling and who listened to you and counseled with you and valued you? When have you had that experience? And when have you had worked with a leader who didn't let you participate, who did try to tell you everything and wouldn't let you do your job? And it's quite interesting hearing back their experiences. I will just share that I've had both. I have had good leaders who understood what Elder Ballard was saying, who delegated a calling to me and let me function in my calling. And we could counsel together, but they weren't micromanaging me and weren't taking all the decisions off of me and were letting me do my job. And it was really great. But I've also been in wards where I wasn't allowed to do my calling, and I wondered why they even gave it to me. It seemed that the bishop or other leader wanted to do all of the work, and I couldn't see the purpose of me being there. There was no counseling going on and nobody listening or letting me do things, and those are pretty miserable assignments when you feel like you're pointless. And so we all need to learn this so that when we're working in a leadership capacity, we can be the right kind of leader like Elder Ballard would like us to be, and not the controlling, wrong kind of leader that isn't helpful in letting people do things. Now, Elder Ballard taught as well some problems we have sometimes with the men and women and the relationship between men and women. So he says, for more than 20 years, I've been teaching the importance of councils, including the vital participation of sister leaders, and the work of councils is emphasized in the current church handbooks. As I write these things, however, I acknowledge that there are some men, including some priesthood leaders, who have not yet seen the light and who still do not include our sister leaders in full participation in ward and state councils. I also acknowledge that there are some men who oppress women and in some rare circumstances are guilty of abusing women. This is abhorrent in the eyes of the Lord. I feel certain that men who in any way demean women will answer to God for their actions. And let me add that any priesthood leader who does not involve his sister leaders with full respect and inclusion is not honoring and magnifying the keys he has been given. His power and influence will be diminished until he learns the ways of the Lord. So again, all of us need to learn to work with the men and women around us in an equitable manner and not dominate. And sisters out there, I just encourage you to speak up, to be participating actively in your assignments and in councils and be involved. And if you're having trouble with a leader who's not letting you be involved, I'd encourage you to have these important conversations and try and work that out. And so leadership can happen. So before we move on to some other principles we can see in the book of Ether, this is really important that we not only understand priesthood power, authority, and keys, but the way that those should be used in church callings so we can all have a good experience at church, and so that the best decisions are made by the Spirit through the council process. Now, let's carry on to Ether chapter 2, and let's have a look again at leadership and what we might see from the brother of Jared's story as they're building these barges and moving along. So if you come to 13, I've already read verse 13, so I'll just have you scan that. We're on the seashore here. We're in Moriancumer. We have Jared and his brother there, and then it's verse 14 that I'd really like to show you. And it came to pass at the end of 4 years that the Lord came again unto the brother of Jared, and stood in a cloud, and talked with him. And for the space of 3 hours did the Lord talk with the brother of Jared, and chastened him, because he remembered not to call upon the name of the Lord. So what do we have here? We have a leader who's been doing a great job, but the minute they hit the sea coast, he seems to drop off a little spiritually and not be communicating with the Lord in the way that he should. And for 4 years, he's not been praying and talking. I don't know why that is. Maybe the brother of Jared liked it on the seashore and didn't want to move and didn't want to know anything else or something. But anyway, the Lord comes and chastens him. So this brings up the idea that we don't have perfect leaders. No leader in our church is going to get everything right. They are all imperfect people. So I just want to show you a list. If you went through the Book of Mormon and looked at some really fabulous leaders, you're going to see they have their bad days too. Lehi had a murmuring moment. Nephi admits to being angry. Jacob was worried about being overly anxious. We have Alma the younger. When he leaves Ammonihah, he's incredibly depressed and just really having a hard time. Amulek wants to do some things that were not inspired. Moroni writes a terribly harsh letter to Pahoran, the chief judge, which is overreactive and unjust. And then Teancum lost his life because he acted out of anger and kind of was a little bit rash. If we jump over to the New Testament and other books of Scripture, we'll see again more imperfect leaders. Moses has some problems. Paul was so unkind to a mission companion, Barnabas, that Barnabas refused to work with him. And then we can see Joseph Smith, Edward Partridge, Newell K. Whitney, all being chastised by the Lord in various ways for not doing right things. Now, Edward Partridge was our first bishop in this dispensation, and Newell K. Whitney was the second one. And so just realize if you're going to work in our church, you're going to work with imperfect people. And we need to learn how to handle that. And so what I like to do with my students is just ask them, am I comfortable with perfect leaders or imperfect ones? And most of them will say, of course. And then I'll ask them, when does it become difficult to accept imperfect leaders? And suddenly we start seeing acknowledgments that it's hard when the leader has done something negative to affect you. Sometimes leaders make decisions that affect you in a negative way. They don't treat you very nicely. You don't understand why they decided what they did. Sometimes they can be offensive or hurtful, or overlook you or forget something. And suddenly that's when we have trouble, is when our feelings have been hurt or we feel like we've not been treated well. And so I just like to stop there with my students and say, we all have to learn how to handle imperfect leaders, because they are going to do things down the road. If it hasn't happened to you yet, it will. Somebody's going to disappoint you or do something that's not right. And so this is something we need to just quickly address. This is from Elder Maxwell. He says, only Jesus was perfect in all things, including love and meekness. Even the greatest of mortal prophets fall short of Christ's high and perfect standards. Thus, as members of the church, if we can see the life of discipleship, whether for ourselves or for the prophets, as a combination of proving, reproving, and improving, we will be much better off. Meanwhile, unevenness in the spiritual development of people means untidiness in the history of people. And we should not make an individual an offender for a word, as if a single communication could set aside all else an individual may have communicated or stood for. So as we have these interactions with our leaders that may not be very positive, we really need to develop this self-discipline to remember that they're imperfect and that one moment doesn't mean that they aren't good people. And we can learn to handle these things. Now, Elder Holland also taught similar things. He says, brothers and sisters, this is a divine work in process, with the manifestations and blessings of abounding in every direction. So please don't hyperventilate if from time to time the issues arise that need to be examined, understood, and resolved. They do, and they will. In this church that we know, we will always trump what we do not know. And remember, in this world, everyone is to walk by faith. So be kind regarding human frailty, your own as well as that of those you serve with in the church. It's led by volunteer mortal men and women. Except in the case of his only perfect begotten Son, imperfect people are all God has ever had to work with. That must be terribly frustrating for him. But he deals with it. So should we. And when you see imperfection, remember that the limitation is not in the divinity of the work. As one gifted writer has suggested, when the infinite fullness is poured forth, it is not the oil's fault if there is some loss, because finite vessels can't quite contain it. The finite vessels include you and me. So be patient and forgiving. So when we have leaders who don't work well sometimes, I'd invite us all to just remember these teachings. The brother of Jared wasn't perfect and he needed to be chastised for a long time. He repented and they're able to carry on next. Now, we're going to pick up the story at that point in chapter 2:18. The brother of Jared has repented and he now has a new assignment to cross this ocean. And they need some barges that are going to be a little different than the ones that they've made, and he needs to go to work. So rather than read all of these verses, 18 through 25 and Ether 3:1 to you, I'm going to let you pause the video and read through them with the question. The brother of Jared needs to solve some problems, and I'd like you to notice the way the Lord helps him through that. What kind of two ways does the Lord use to help us solve our problems and help leaders solve problems? So go ahead and pause the video and read those verses for a minute and see if you can identify the Lord's methods. Okay, hopefully you've had a good time looking at those verses. There's some really interesting things as we're trying to build these barges, and so I just want to talk about what lessons there might be in here for us. So if you'll come down to verse 19, the brother of Jared builds these barges, and he's very complimentary in the previous verses about what they're like. And maybe you enjoyed this repetitive phrase, tight like unto a dish, over and over and over again. But we get done building them, and the brother of Jared just kind of realizes there's some architectural flaws in these barges. So let's have a look at the problems. Verse 19, there is no light. Whither shall we steer? We have no way to steer these barges, and also we cannot breathe. And you can imagine being the brother of Jared and going to the Lord and kind of being sheepish about pointing out the architectural flaws. Like, those are some big flaws. No light, no steering, and no breathing. Okay, so how are we going to solve these? And then you watch the brother of Jared learning from the Lord, and the Lord does handle it in a particular way. Verse 20 is one of the ways he will help you solve your problems. And he tells the brother of Jared how to fix the breathing issue. Okay, you're going to make holes in the top and the bottom. You're going to have a little plug for them. And that way, whether your barge is upright or not, you can tell which way is up by letting in the water, and then you can plug it, and then you can have a breathing hole when you need it. So in what way did the Lord help him? By telling him how to solve the problem. Then, if you move to 21, you see the brother of Jared doing that. And then you go to verse 22. I've done what you've said, but we still don't have a solution to the light problem. And the Lord comes back and says, what do you want me to do? So sometimes when you're dealing with a problem, the Lord may not give you the exact solution. He may say, I want you to figure it out. Now notice what he does to help the brother of Jared. He tells him what not to do. I don't want you having windows. Those will be dashed out by the ocean. And you can't have fire. You can imagine setting your barge on fire or all the smoke that would be a problem inside there. So don't choose those options, but I need you to figure out another option. And so the brother of Jared is going to do that. Now, before we leave this issue, what do we do with the steering here? Well, let's have a look down here at verse 24. I'm going to take care of it with the wind. I'm going to send forth this wind, and it's going to blow you, and I will handle the steering. So we see the Lord going, I've got an answer for you on how to solve the breathing. Don't you worry about the steering. I've got that one. But what I want you to do is learn to solve the light problem. So let's turn over to chapter 3 and have a look really quickly at the way he does that. So verse 1 in chapter 3 says, the brother of Jared, now the number of vessels which had been prepared was 8, went forth unto the Mount Shelem. And because of its exceeding height, and did molten out of a rock 16 small stones, and they were white and clear, even as transparent glass. And he did carry them in his hands upon the top of the mount, and cried again unto the Lord, saying. And then we get this beautiful prayer about this. Now, really quickly, I'd like to take you with me to Genesis chapter 6. Where did the brother of Jared get this idea for glowing stones? Sometimes we think he just pulled it out of the air. I'm not so sure he pulled it out of the air. I think he had access to some scriptures, and he may have gone back and looked at another group of people who needed a boat and had to light it and had to figure out how to do that. And so if we go to Genesis chapter 6 and we look at verse 16, we suddenly start learning about the ark. Now, the KJV translation reads this way, a window shalt thou make to the ark, and in a cubit thou shalt finish it above, and the door of the ark shall be, and you've got doors and windows. And so you just wonder, well, the brother Jared was told not to make windows, so how does this inspire him? Well, you need to use your footnote. If you go down to 16a, we can get a good look at the Hebrew word, shohar. And some rabbis believe this should be translated as a precious stone that's shown in the ark. And that would make a lot of sense. And so if that's true, if the brother of Jared's records were translated as a stone, not a window, then look at where he got his idea from. He went and did some scripture study, and he was inspired by what he saw there and then applied it to his specific circumstances. He doesn't have one boat, so one stone isn't going to do him any good. He's got 8 barges, and so what does he do? He takes the stone idea, he adapts it, and makes 16 small ones so he can put 2 in each barge. And all he needs now is for the Lord to light them, which he cannot do, and he goes in this beautiful prayer in verses 2 through 5 and asks the Lord to light them, which the Lord is very happy to do. And we have this great appearance and this great moment with the brother of Jared getting to see the pre-mortal Jesus Christ and having a really great discussion there. So as we stop and think about this, when I'm solving problems in my life, what can I expect the Lord to do? Well, number 1, he will give me answers sometimes that are just fully formed about how to solve it. Number 2, he may say, don't worry about it, I got this. And number 3, he may say, I need you to come up with a solution and figure out how we're going to solve this. And I need to be comfortable with all 3 of those ways in getting help for my problems. And so I'm going to hold our lesson there with this principle of leadership. Hopefully this has been helpful in exposing you to priesthood authority, priesthood power, priesthood keys, how to counsel together, how to learn to be a better leader, and then when it's time to solve problems, what can I do to help myself do that? And this is a really great way of learning. And so I just want to share my testimony. We are all going to have opportunities to lead in one way or another in our church, and we lead at home as well. And so it's really important to learn how to do it well. And we all have problems. We all have things we need revelation for. And we can certainly go to the Lord and start working with Him, knowing how He will work back and find more success in finding those solutions. So I just invite you to recognize that you can rise to the occasion, be a good and effective leader, and Ether really helps us with that. And I share that with you in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.